Hey everybody, how's it going? My name is Chris, this is my shop partner Oots, and today I'm going to show you how to take an old rusty hand plane and turn it into a nice usable tool just like this one here. So let's get started. I'm first going to completely take the plane apart. And when buying an old plane, you should take the plane apart as much as you can and really inspect all the components for damage before you buy it. A lot of times old planes get pieced together with different parts from other planes, and most of the time these Franken planes, they work just fine and it doesn't hurt the functionality. But if having a completely original plane is important to you, then it's something that you might want to research and look out for before buying. Throughout the years, Stanley made changes and improvements to the planes. Each different version of the same plane is classified by a type number. This plane is a number 5 jack plane, which indicates its size and general use, but it's a type 11 number 5, which means it's the 11th version of the plane, and I'll talk more about that and the different types at the end of this video, so stay tuned if you're interested in learning more about that. Once I have all the pieces taken apart and the loose debris and dirt brushed off, I'll scrub the parts in some soapy water using a plastic bristle brush to remove as much grime and dirt as I can. I take this step because next I'll be submerging the parts in a rust remover. The rust remover will work a lot better if the parts are cleaned and degreased first. Plus I don't want all that extra dirt and gunk in the rust remover solution because I can save that and reuse it again later. Here you can see the parts look a lot better already, but there's still a lot of rust on there. I've used plain old white distilled vinegar in the past as a rust remover, but I saw this WD-40 rust remover at Lowe's the other day and decided to give it a try, and honestly I was super impressed. Not only did it work incredibly fast, but it's pretty much a harmless, biodegradable, non-toxic solution. I was thinking that something like a rust remover was going to be really caustic and really harmful, but that wasn't the case at all. So while those parts soak, I'm going to work on the broken tote. The top flange was broken, which is very common, but the piece had been re-glued and screwed back into place. So I'm going to scrub away the loose glue and dirt with a wire brush and then then prepare the surfaces with some sandpaper so that I can re-glue them using epoxy. The toe and front knob were actually in pretty good shape, but I decided to sand them anyways to see if I could brighten them up a little bit. I just removed the outer grime with some 320 grit sandpaper, and I'm going to add some walnut oil later on. And with an odd-shaped piece like this, a rubber band makes a really good clamp. Then I'll go check out my pieces that have been soaking for about 2 hours, and all the rust had literally vanished. Before assembling the plane, I'm going to do some work on its components. I'm going to start by flattening the face of the frog, which is the piece that supports the plane blade. It's important that this surface is nice and flat so the plane blade has a solid foundation. I use a coarse diamond stone to do this flattening, but you can use a water stone or sandpaper on a flat surface. The lateral adjustment lever will prevent you from putting the entire frog on the stone at once, so I'm constantly going to move the frog around so that I get even cutting on all areas. Once the face of the frog is flat, I'm going to make sure the points that make contact with the plane body are also flat. There are 2 areas that make contact with the plane body, and it's important to only remove equal material from each area or your frog will not seek properly again later on. I usually do about 10 strokes on one area and then do the same number on the other area to keep them in proper alignment. I'll go back and forth doing about the same number of strokes on each area until I'm happy and I have a nice flat surface. Here I'm showing where the 2 areas of contact are. After flattening those areas on the frog, I'll seat the frog into the plane body, and with light pressure, I'm going to see if there's any rocking or wobble in the frog. Think of it when a 4-legged table has one leg that is too short. It will rock. That's the same thing you're looking for here. You want a nice solid seat and no rocking. If there's any kind of rocking or wobble, you'll need to find the high areas and bring them down. Then I'll add the screws that secure the frog to the plane body. And these need to be loosened anytime you want to move the frog forward or backwards. You move the frog to open or close the mouth of the plane with an adjustment screw at the rear of the frog. I'll be talking more about that and why it's important in a separate video on how to set up a hand plane. I'll be publishing that video in about a week or so after the date of this video. When assembling, I'll add a little oil to all the threads on all the screws. Then I'll add some Mahoney's walnut oil to the tote and knob, which really brought the rosewood back to life. Off camera, I polished the brass and screws with some 600 grit sandpaper and then stropped them. After that, I'll be adding the blade and chip breaker. And I made a separate video on sharpening the blade and how to do it with both sandpaper and stones, which I'll be posting in the next couple of days. So if you aren't already, please consider subscribing, and if you hit the bell icon, you'll be notified of any new videos. Before I start flattening the bottom of the plane, I want to make sure there is proper tension. I do this by setting the tension on the lever cap. I will adjust the lever cap screw when the lever cap is released. I just simply turn it until there's proper tension. I'm looking for a nice firm audible snap when setting the lever cap. You don't want it too loose so that the blade moves while trying to use the plane, or too tight where it makes it hard to adjust the blade. Then I'll back the blade up so that it's not protruding out of the bottom. To flatten the bottom, I'm going to use some 120 grit stick-back sandpaper on a piece of float glass. You can use a granite block or even your table saw if it has a nice flat cast iron top. Stick-back sandpaper has been hard for me to find, and so a nice alternative is to just use some spray adhesive and some regular non-stick-back sandpaper. I change the sandpaper frequently, and I like the rolls because I can make my sheets as long as I want. I make a few passes and look at the bottom of the plane to see where the sandpaper cut. I will keep rubbing on the sandpaper until I've flattened the majority of the bottom. The front and rear edges are usually worn much more than the rest of the plane, and it would take a lot of extra work to get those areas flat. And in actuality, I want the front and rear edge to have a slight curve in them so that they'll actually ride up and over different levels of wood rather than crash into them. When I'm happy with the bottom, I will clean up the sides. Luckily, this plane's sides were at 90 degrees to the bottom, so it was really easy for me to use this as a shooting plane. If the sides are not square, you can still use the plane for shooting by adjusting the plane's blade lateral adjuster until the blade is 90 degrees to the shooting board. It's not ideal that way, but it still can be done. Now I'm going to round all the edges of the sides and the front and the back of the plane. Again, this is to help the plane ride up and over any different levels in wood, such as the corners of a cabinet door or the boards in a tabletop after a glue up. Next, I will take some 600 grit wet and dry sandpaper and remove some more of the aggressive scratch marks that were made from the 120 grit sandpaper I used earlier. I will also go at all the edges and sides to give the metal a nice smooth finish, and I don't think you need to go any higher than 600. The final step is that I rub any bare metal and wood with a crystalline wax such as Renaissance wax. This stuff makes a really nice protective barrier to moisture. I actually put it on all my tools and cast iron power tool tops twice a year, and I've never had any problems with rust. It also adds a nice luster to the toe and knob when hand rubbed in. It's absolutely amazing to me that this tool is over 100 years old. It's really cool to think about all the different craftsmen who have held it and used this tool over the last century, and with proper care and a little periodic upkeep, this plane should last another 100 years and is hopefully passed down to my kids and my grandkids as well. Well, I hope you learned something and this video helps you restore one of these amazing tools for yourself. Now stick around if you want to hear a little bit more about this plane and the different types. Now I got this plane at a flea market. I got a really good deal on it. I got it for $12. The great thing about this plane, even though it's all rusted, I think most of it is superficial surface rust. The body and everything looks like it's in pretty good condition, but this is a type 11, which is a really desirable, I guess, year class of this plane. Every so often Stanley would improve these planes, and every time they made an improvement or changed something, it would be called a different type. So it started at essentially, type 1, which is the very first plane, and every time they made an improvement, the second improvement would be type 2 and so on and so forth. Type 11 is considered one of the more desirable ones out there because there's some features on it that Stanley made throughout the different iterations before it, where it had kind of all the bells and whistles, but the manufacturing was still really high quality and they weren't starting to skimp on anything yet. So the Type 11s are one of the more sought after ones, and I got really lucky and I got one here. So I'm gonna restore that. And when I say restore, there's always gonna be people that get their panties in a bunch anytime you're restoring an antique and you're not like keeping it original or whatever. But I'm gonna restore this plane for me. I own it and I'm gonna keep it probably for the next till I hand it off to my grandkids someday. And I'm gonna restore this plane to use. I'm not a tool collector, I'm not an antique dealer, and I didn't buy this plane to restore and trying to turn a profit on it. I think the value of these things is very subjective to each individual. When I restore this, I'm gonna put a lot of effort into this and turning this plane into a beautiful working tool again. And the value of that is gonna be probably, 10 times more what the plane's actually worth. So I'll probably never sell it. To me, I think this is a tool that should be used and not, bought and restored and sold. So that's what I'm gonna do. And if you don't like the way I restore it, sorry, too bad. This is mine and I get to do with it what I want. So now I'll show you, I'm gonna zoom in real quick and show you some of the differences, kind of give you some examples about how the planes have changed over the years before I jump into restoring it. So let's zoom in. So the first thing you'll probably notice is the front knob height. On these older ones, they were low knobs, and later on, Stanley changed the knobs to higher in the front. Another thing, and the reason why these older planes are a little bit more desirable is if you can see the amount of material compared between the two. This older Type 11 has, oh man, almost double the thickness of the bottom of the sole compared to this Type 15, which was my grandfather's. Now, I mean, both of these will work really, really well. I use this plane on almost every single project. There's nostalgia value that's my grandpa's, and that's why I reach for it all the time. But even though this is a thinner soled plane and not quite as heavy duty as this, it works just fine. So don't get caught up thinking you need a Type 11 or a 12 or some of the older ones. Any of these planes will work just fine if you put a little effort into tuning them up. Okay, some of the other features that make these a little bit different is on the back here, if you can see down in there, there is some, and we'll get some better shots of that later, patent dates. If there's 3 patent dates, it's going to be either a Type 11 or type 12. My grandpa's doesn't have any, so anytime you run across a plane that has no patent dates there, there's either going to be none, 1, 2, or 3. If there's none, then it's either a type 1 through 8 or a type 15 through, I don't know what it is, 19 or 20 or something. So, but I know this one's a little bit older. There's some other features that tell me that. But the knob here, the depth adjustment knob of the plane is wider than on this older one. That's another telltale feature. And there's other things like the raised circle around the knob. You can see this older one doesn't have one, the newer one does. So there's just that's a rabbit hole you can go down and research. There's all sorts of really cool information out there, studying these planes and learning about them.